Welcome back to this week's podcast, and I hope you've had a great week. And I wanted just to share with you a really key subject area that many people in sales ask questions about and get a bit lost about. And it's going to be a relatively short podcast this week, but it's all around why your emails are not being responded to in sales situations. So if you're listening to this thinking, yeah, I send quite a few emails and I don't get responses back, and I'm not sure why that is, this is the podcast episode for you. So let me start by talking through why this happens, and there are two or three main reasons as to why your emails are not getting responded to. And what I'll then do is give you some tips as to how you can try and avoid that happening in the future. So point number one is why your emails are not getting responded to. Point number one is because they're generally selfishly focused. What I see a lot of people do in sales situations is they send an email that's based upon what they want as the buyer or as the seller. So a traditional email will come out and will say, you have a meeting with someone, you have a good conversation, and you have a discussion with them. And what will happen is you'll follow up afterwards and say, maybe you've shared a proposal with someone, or maybe you've sent them some information, and they've not got back to you. And one of the times, most of the nature of the emails that come out is the email comes out saying, hi John, it's Dave here, really keen to find out where you are with your thoughts on the information that I shared and whether we can move things forward, let me know. So inherently, when the buyer gets that email, they look at an email like that and go, okay, Dave wants an update on what's going on in his deal, and okay, he wants to know if I can work with him. And ironically enough, for the buyer, that doesn't serve them. There's nothing in there about trying to help them solve a problem. There's nothing in there about trying to help them, get to a better place. All that they see in front of them is something from a salesperson that wants to help themselves and help meet their target or help achieve their goals. So guess what? When that email comes through, unless it just happens to land on the desk of the person at the exact right time when that person needs a solution, it's very easy for that person to ignore that because there's nothing in it for them. It's all about the seller. So the first thing I'm going to encourage you to do is to look at the emails that you're sending and look back at the follow-up emails that you're sending and to query and question whether the emails you're sending have a value for the buyer or for you as the seller. And I would bet my bottom dollar that most of the time you're sending emails that are about your service or your product or what's right for you, but not about the pain and the desire and the issues for the buyer. And when we start to realise that those emails are, being blunt, selfish, and they're focused on us and not on what the other person wants, then we start to get a better reaction and response. So adjust firstly your emails so that they are not selfishly focused, but they are focused on the needs of the buyer and the challenges and the goals and the things that the buyer wants to do. And when you write your emails, just double check and say, am I asking for something here just as a follow-up to what I've already done? Or am I creating some further value? Am I trying to share an insight to a problem that the buyer might have? And that's a critical part of why your emails are being ignored, is because they're focused on you and not the buyer itself. So that's the first point. The second point of why your emails are also being ignored, which is linked to the first point, is that you haven't been self-aware enough to realise that the meeting that you had with someone didn't go as well as you thought. Now, what do I mean by that? Again, if I had a pound for every time a salesperson says, oh, the meeting went really, really well, everything was great, it was brilliant. And salespeople have what I would call happy ears, okay, or happy ears and happy eyes. Because people want to win deals, they only see what they want to see. And they see someone nodding their head as being, oh, that must mean they're happy, or they must mean they're keen to go forward. Or they see someone agreeing, and they must think, oh, that must mean they want to do something with me. And they don't have the self-awareness and the emotional intelligence to realise actually those nods were just that person being polite, and they didn't really engage with you through the course of the meeting. You didn't really dig into any of their challenges and their issues in their world. You didn't really get to know them that well. And so ultimately at the end of it, whereas you thought the meeting was an 8 and 9 out of 10, they thought it was a 3 or 4. And if you don't have the ability to be self-aware and reflective of those type of conversations, then when you then go to send a proposal, send an email or follow up, because you've misread the situation and if your intuition is so far out, you've literally got it completely wrong as to what you think they thought and what they actually did think, that the reality is when they get their email, when you get your email, it's like, oh, him again or her again. Why would I want to react back to that person? All they did in that meeting was talk about themselves and talk about how great their company was. They're not for me, thanks very much. And it's easier for them to ignore your email. So the reality is, if you've had that meeting, make sure that you use your self-awareness. And again, if you've watched and listened to any of my podcasts before, you'll know that meetings are about the buyer. It's about understanding the other person. It's about building rapport. It's about getting to ask great questions to find out what they really focus on and what's driving their agenda right now. So don't be in a position where you have those meetings and you start thinking just because you've asked one or two questions about the other person that you can then start talking about you. Your meeting should be focused on serving and providing solutions to the buyer. And if you do that, and they think that you're helpful and you're interested in them and that you're focused on giving them a solution, then they're more inclined to then want to carry on the conversations. They're more inclined to then want to meet with you again. And therefore, they're more inclined that when you then do share an email, hopefully with value, because you've learnt around what they've suggested, you've learnt around what they have an issue with, that they're going to want to then think, okay, I'm actually open to having a conversation with this person. So point number two, point number one is don't follow up selfishly. But point number two is be self-aware enough in meetings to realise whether the person that you're engaging with did enjoy that meeting the same way. And a great way to finish off conversations is to be able to, at the end of a conversation, say, I've really enjoyed our conversation today, Darren, and I think I'd love to be in a position where I share some insights to help you overcome some of the issues and the challenges that you've mentioned and share some of those with your colleagues. Tell me what would be useful for you. And you want the other person saying, yeah, I'd love to get some ideas. I'd love you to come in and help us talk through this issue. Or I'd really welcome a chance to find out a bit more about how you're helping other people do this. Or can you tell me more about how you're helping or what you're doing to solve that organisation's problem? And what that will then do is it will get people to go, okay, great, yeah, that's fantastic. I'm open to having a conversation. So when you then do follow up, they're going to want to engage with you. So point number two is do that follow up in a way and be self-aware. Point number three is this: with emails, is people are often unrealistic of timescales. And I see this again a lot in larger enterprise deals, which can sometimes take 3 to 6 months to go from start to finish. And people will respond with a message in day one, and then they'll not hear with an email on day 4, and they'll drop another email back in day 7. I think, well, why is nothing happening? And what they fail to realise is that the sales process and the sales cycle is taking a lot longer. So one of the key things that you should be able to look to do is identify from the moment you engage with a prospect, look at the last deal you've done, the moment you engage with a prospect through to when they bought from you, what's the length of that process? So the moment they first came in to find out about you, maybe they downloaded a guide or a resource, to when they actually engaged with you, what's the length of the process? And if that process, as the case is in lots of businesses, is 3 or 4 months, then you following up every 2 or 3 days is going to make you look desperate. So put in your CRM or put a reminder in your diary to follow up every 7 or 8, maybe every 10 days, and maybe even every 2 weeks. And that's going to be a far more realistic reminder of an email, a far more realistic idea for the buyer than you being in a position where you're following up all the time, because desperation is a stinky perfume. And if you keep on emailing and following up and looking desperate, when the sales cycle is longer, you're going to just piss people off and you're going to make people not want to have an engagement with you. So understand the sales cycle and then adjust your time frames to respond back based upon that. Now, obviously, if you have a sales cycle that's a 2-week sales cycle, sure, you've got to get back to someone within 2 or 3 days. But if it's going to take that bit longer, then accept that. Just put a note in your diary to follow up every 10 days, but make sure that follow-up email then is following up with value. So it's following up with something that's of interest to the buyer, a conversation point that you've talked about when you were in meetings with them, a discussion that you've had. So don't follow up again selfishly. Follow up with, when we spoke, you mentioned about a couple of areas over here which you were discussing. I wanted to share a resource with you, or here's a link that I found on an article that I found that might be useful for you. I sent a message to a CEO last year where I was trying to follow up with them about something, and they'd mentioned an organisation they were quite keen to join, and I sent them an overview review of that organisation. they came back and said, thanks very much, that's really helpful. So find things that are of relevance to that person and then send that link to them to make sure that you're doing that, but at the right time. Understand the sales process and the sales timelines that you're working with and make sure you fit those in accordingly. And then I guess the fourth point relating to emails is if you've never met the person and you're wondering how you can engage with them and why they don't reply to your emails, it's invariably for two reasons that they're not doing that. A, most initial emails and prospecting sequences that lots of salespeople use are quite frankly shit. They are shit because they are a cookie cutter approach. They're all literally copied and pasted and sent to the same group of people. They are focused on the company and what they do. I also, I've used this phrase before, they we all over the buyer. So they talk about how we do things and we're great and your buyers don't care for that. They are literally, the emails themselves are not personalised in any way. They've not gone to look at that person's profile or understood something about them or commented on an award. They're cookie cutter, and they tend to try and be quite gimmicky and clever for the sake of it. And they also tend to talk about, scenarios which is totally irrelevant to the other person. So the reason your emails are getting ignored is that that cookie cutter approach, you're not being personalised in the way in which you communicate. So, we have to make sure that if we want to knock on the door and get engagement with someone, we have to try and be a bit more personalised, a bit more specific in our approach. And the second reason why you're not getting, emails, your emails are getting ignored is because, and this is something a lady messaged me the other day and asked me a question about this, why are my emails getting ignored? And when I looked at the email outline that she's sending, it's all about her and her product, and again, it's going back to that point I mentioned at the start. It's selfish, but there's no reason, there's no call to action, there's no outcome shared in the email that can make that buyer go, oh wow, okay, I didn't know that actually. Blimey, okay, well that's quite interesting, well, that's quite helpful, or oh wow, that's quite unique or a bit different. There's nothing in it. It's just generally we've got this product. Do you want to sell our product or our service? And buyers look at that and go, what's in it for me? What do I get for it? Well, I can't see what I can get for it. So therefore, and if they have to think about it too much, then you're going to literally fail to engage them. People get so many emails per day that unless you can be something that's very relevant to them, and we'll talk about how to solve that in a minute with relevance, unless you can be very relevant to them or specific to them, they're just going to press delete because it's easier to press delete than not. So make sure you try and identify your USP. What is it that you bring to the equation that's going to make that buyer go, oh wow, I didn't think of that, or I didn't realise that could happen, or that could give me something, or what's so different about you that's going to make them intrigued. So they might not respond to that first email, but if you keep engaging with them, they're going to think this is helpful. So those are the reasons why your emails are initially being ignored. How do you fix it then? What do you do? So basically, you do the opposite of what I've just talked about over the course of the last few moments. So you make sure that you're not being selfish in your communications follow-up. You're making sure that you understand what's going on in the buyer's world and you share stuff with them. You do it in the right time. But a couple of other things just to bear in mind when you're following up that I think are really, really useful to think about, and especially if you're doing this with people in new emails. If you're doing someone you've never met before, what I would suggest you to do is you're far better off to create 10 separate emails to 10 separate people that are in a sub-niche than to one email that goes out to 100 people. So, for example, I'm working with an insurance company at the moment, and they are working with different specialities of insurance. So whereas in the past they provide insurance across a whole range of people, I'm saying to them, actually, you're better off to go and focus on urology department or gynecology or different departments. And your communications to those people should be quite specific about the challenges in that space and what's going on, to at least give the reader the chance to think they understand who I am and they understand my dynamics and what's going on. The other issue that you've probably got in your emails is that your emails are too long. I see so many emails, unfortunately, that are just like War and Peace. It's like 10, 15, sentences across 7 or 8 paragraphs. It's long. It's just too long. And especially when you're trying to engage with someone initially, buyers just aren't going to engage with that. They're not going to read it all, and it's going to look like hard work. We all have 2 parts of our brain, which are System 1 and System 2, as Daniel Kahneman talked about in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And System 1 is where the brain is the natural reaction to things, the things that we do day to day, and System 2 is when we have to think about it, where it taxes our brain. And invariably, if you see a large amount of text on an email that looks like it's going to be complicated to read, your brain goes, I haven't got time for that today, and there's more chance to ignore it. So if you can put together some examples of emails, and I share some of these actually in my sales plan course, which I've just launched, which you'll be able to get access to, put some emails together that are short and sharp and punchy, that talk to an issue or specific challenge that the audience has got, because you understand that audience and you've researched them and focused on what their issues are, then you're going to stand a better chance of success. So be punchy in those responses. So that's point number 2. But the third point, and my final point around email or 3 and 4 actually, is A, don't give up so quickly. People send 1 or 2 emails and then assume, oh, that's done. And, I get literally hundreds of emails a day, so do you. If you send 3 emails, the chances are you're not engaging enough in the process, and you're using the advice I've given to be more personalised, but you're just not engaging enough. Google Zero Moments of Truth talked about how you need 7 hours of content across 11 interactions across 4 media. So ideally, you should be engaging. If you're just going to use email, then you need to engage at least 11 times and to share stuff that's insightful and useful. And if someone shows me that type of persistence, I actually think to myself, wow, this person's really committed to working with me. What have they got to actually say? So firstly is you've got to engage a bit more. Don't give up on 3 or 4 occasions, and don't just do that through automated sequences either, because people can see through those. But the final point of this is, don't just use email. One of the things that I see a lot of the time is that people just use one channel. Now go back to that Google Zero Moments of Truth that I talked about. 7 hours of content across 11 interactions across 4 media. So what are the 4 media? Well, it could well be a phone call. It could well be a social message. It could well be a video message. It could be a voice note message. It could be a direct mail. There are other forms of media that you can use to engage. And if you really want to engage and work with that client, don't just rely on email. So pick up the phone to them. Try and drop them a message on social media. Try and do a video message. I'm going to talk about a video message on a different podcast, but do a video, do something else that makes them think, wow, this person's really keen to get hold of me. People use email because they can automate a lot of the processes, and therefore it looks lazy, and therefore it looks unpersonal, and therefore it doesn't get reaction. So decide if you really know the audience you want to engage with, and again, I cover this all in my sales plan course that I've just launched, then you'll be able to be able to cross multiple touch points. And eventually that person's either going to say, leave me alone, thanks very much, I don't need the service, I don't have a need for this, I want for this right now. Or they're going to be like, okay, you're persistent, what is it you want to say? What is it you've got to offer? And then we can then start the engagement activity. So look, lots of areas I've covered in today's podcast. And maybe, I thought it was going to be a shorter one, but maybe it's gone a bit longer than I thought. But I wanted to share some insights and nuggets of gold that can be useful for you. I hope it's been helpful. I hope it's given you the sort of insights that you needed and wanted. And I think that what I would say to you is, just don't give up. Sales is persistence. We've got to be persistent, but persistence with value. Persistence with value, persistence with personalization, persistence with an element of being able to really understand the people and who they are and what's going on, and focus on that target market and be able to think, right, I know I can help that audience. And if you do that and you do continue to commit and share because you care about them and them getting the right results, then you're going to see a better chance of getting responses. But if you just want to spray and pray and hope people are going to come back to you and think, oh, I want an easier route to spray and pray, then probably nothing I'm going to say is going to help you. That's your approach to selling, and I think it's a defunct approach. It's not going to work, or your chance of sales success are lower than you'd like it to be. So try and put some of these elements in place, and if you can, you're going to hopefully see emails get responded to and replied back to. And there is actually a simple tip I always say to people. If you have sent an email to someone that you've engaged with and responded with that you haven't had back to them, then there is a simple message you can use, which is basically, it looks like you've decided to give up on this project. And because you encourage the person to say no, then it will generally drive a response, which might well be, no, we're still keen, or we're looking. But I would use that as a last resort. I wouldn't use that straight away in the process. You should be following up with value. You should be giving insights. If you've met the person, you should be sharing things that can help them. The law of reciprocity counts here. People do want to give something back if you're giving them information and helping them. If you're doing that on a new person, be focused on them, be relevant to them, be unique to them and their space, and get these things in the right place, and you're going to hopefully get good results. So I hope that's helped you on why your emails are not getting a response. If you've got any comments, let me know in this comment section, or reach out to me on social media at James White Sales. Always happy to share thoughts on what might be working for you or not. But those are the things that I know work in a sales situation. So always happy to have a discussion. But if you want to get the results you want, apply the techniques that I've talked about, and you will. So there you go. Right, so I always finish the podcast with an inspirational story, and I wanted just to, this is the first podcast that I've done since we heard of a lady called Jasmine Paris. So Jasmine Paris has become one of the first ladies. She was the first female runner to basically finish a race in America, which is basically known as the hardest, toughest worldwide race. It's called the Barkley Marathon in Tennessee. Have a look at it. She's one of the only 20 people to finish the marathon since it was extended since 1989. Basically, you have to finish this marathon within 100 hours before a 60-hour cut-off point, and she did it with 99 seconds to spare. And she's an incredible lady in Scotland. I'm going to try and get her onto my podcast because I brought Gary McKee on. I'm going to try and get Russ Cook on. I'd love to get Jasmine Paris on the podcast, but an incredible lady. And yeah, look, I think her inspirational story is one that I would say to you to look out for. She proved that she could complete something that only 20 people have ever done, and she did it even though time was running out. So Jasmine Paris, incredible inspiration. Look her up. It's someone that you can be inspired by, and I hope she's inspiring you to do what you want to do and achieve the life that you want to put in place for you and your family. So that's it from me for this week's podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for giving me your ears. If you love what we do, please like and tell other people about it and give us a rating on your podcast platform. But that's it from me until next week. See you then. Bye.